Good morning, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is a chart of the dollar Swiss franc. If we go into a tighter look, we can see that the news this morning actually was announced sometime last night, but you can see that we pretty much dumped off a cliff with the news about the debt ceiling. We've been in a long-term, well, in a pretty serious free fall, long-term move down, and we're now starting to dump off the cliff here. So the dollar is basically collapsing in value against the Swiss franc. Is the Swiss franc a hard currency? No, but it's much harder than the euro, for example. Also against the Japanese yen, you can see our reaction to the news is negative. The downtrend in the dollar against the yen continues and is now dumping off a cliff. Now there's been a brief rally. If we look real closely here, we have a brief rally, and it may hint at central bank intervention, but then again it might just be speculators balancing their books and things like that. So we don't really know. We'll have to wait and see if this turns around and heads down farther. It's quite a sell-off. Wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of contrarians take the other side. Now, if we look at the US dollar euro, remember when this goes down, that means the euro is getting weaker. So we had a big sell-off in the euro this morning. That's one of the reasons why we have the dollar index is rallying. You can see we have a strong rally in the dollar index. Remember, the dollar index is a basket of currencies. If you look long term, that's not that strong of a rally, but somewhat. So the dollar index is rallying. That's mainly due to the euro. But as opposed to other currencies, it's not that strong of a rally. If we pull up a currency such as the Australian dollar, you can see a little bit of weakness on this news, but I wanted to pull up a long-term chart to show you what's really going on. I had a tremendous buy signal on the Australian dollar back when we got into the 50 cents range. It doesn't show on this chart, but we actually got into the 50 cents. And if you look at the chart, you can see that really this long-term trend has pretty much held up, except for this anomaly right here. What was this anomaly? This was the fake deflationary crash. This was the financial crisis. This was the biggest deflationary scare they've ever pulled out of the hat so far. Was it real? No, ultimately it wasn't. It just meant more inflation. But because of this scare, they managed to collapse the Australian dollar. Now you can see we're moving back onto this trend, and the Australian dollar has surpassed 1-to-1. So the Australian dollar at this point, one Australian dollar is worth more than one US dollar. So I don't find that surprising. Based on the fundamentals, Australia is more of a resource-based economy, and with its proximity to Asia, it should benefit from any kind of growth that will continue in Asia. So I don't find it surprising that this strength in the Australian dollar has continued, and you see the same thing in the New Zealand dollar and other currencies. So the basic story is that the US dollar continues to collapse, even though there's some temporary strength. You can see long term the US dollar is pretty much in free fall against most major currencies except the euro. And I think the fundamental news that causes that to be the case, I will read an interview, fairly interesting. It was just posted on Zero Hedge, and of course Zero Hedge has now become populated with a bunch of liberal dum-dums, so you can hear their comments below bashing this guy. But this guy, I'd never heard of him before, but his name is Meckler, Mark Meckler, supposedly the founder of the Tea Party Patriots. And you can just see the bottom line reasoning of a rational, sane person, as opposed to the nutcases that we have in both parties right now, whether it's Boehner or Obama. The only question is how much more money are they going to spend? There's no debate about cutting. So let's listen to Mark Meckler, and somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And of course, Der Spiegel is being praised here by the fact that they interviewed this guy in their mainstream media. Of course, you can see the bias in the interviewer. It's unbelievable, the bias in the mainstream press. I mean, it's like every one of them is a socialist. But let's read the interview here. The German daily Der Spiegel has conducted a rather unexpected interview with Mark Meckler, co-founder of the Tea Party Patriots, or About As Right As They Come, in which he discusses the U.S. debt ceiling, the radical right's uncompromising fight against the national debt, and complete economic disaster he claims President Barack Obama has created. Naturally, the bottom line should not come as a surprise to anyone. The Great Reset is overdue, and it's all Obama's fault. What is curious is that Germany is giving such a prominent soapbox to one of the U.S. administration's biggest critics. Is Germany becoming more actively involved in doing what the ECB's Trichet and Neuer have done over the past, namely deflecting Europe's own problems by pointing out the country which Europeans have said has even worse credit fundamentals? Will ridiculing America be the dominant theme in Europe's media over the next few weeks, even as the second European bailout falls apart? Is the game of G8 scapegoating about to take on a whole new dimension? And what does that mean for future consensus in an organization that has, for now, been largely submissive to the U.S.'s every whim? We'll find out in the coming months. So, I don't know if that's Tyler's comment, but it's just stupid. Anyway, let's listen to Mark Meckler. Spiegel. The world is looking at Washington and sees gridlock and chaos. How much have the negotiations over the United States debt ceiling hurt America's standing in the world? Meckler. Saying that these debates have hurt our image is absurd. What you currently see in Washington is one of the most responsible debates ever about the size and scope of government. The world should look at what is going on in the United States as a model for what should happen in all countries. Spiegel. We look at it and see Congress held hostage by a small group of radical Tea Party members unwilling to agree to any budget compromise and risking a U.S. default. Meckler. What do you mean by a small group? 41% of voters in the last U.S. election said they agreed with Tea Party values, and the primary values of the Tea Party are about fiscal responsibility. Spiegel. But you are willing to accept a U.S. default if your demands for massive budget cuts and no tax increases are not met? That seems rather irresponsible or even unpatriotic. Most leading economists forecast financial Armageddon in that case. Meckler. Default is a false threat. We take in over $220 billion in revenue every month, and our debt service is roughly $20 billion. The only way we will default is if the President of the United States makes the irresponsible choice to not pay our debts. We Tea Party patriots put principles first, and we have to understand what America is about. Our country was founded on an idea, liberty, but it requires fiscal responsibility for people to be free. We are becoming slaves to our own government. Every U.S. family now owes $400,000 to $500,000 in national debt. We Tea Party patriots fight for the future of the nation, and there can be nothing more patriotic than that. Spiegel. Democracy is not just about winning fights. It can only function if all parties are open to compromise. Meckler. The compromises that we have witnessed on debt have taken our country to the brink of financial collapse. Currently, the American government is spending 44 cents of each dollar on interest payments. We have compromised our way into disaster. None of the budget plans proposed have real cuts in them, only promises to cut. The reality is that legally one Congress cannot bind the future Congress to cut, so these promises are actually a lie. We need real and immediate cuts. Spiegel. The budget plan proposed by Republican Speaker John Boehner contained massive spending cuts. Why were you so unwilling to embrace it? Meckler. Look closely at the plan. It proposes $22 billion in cuts in the upcoming fiscal year. That's ridiculously little. It's the equivalent in the United States of shutting off the lights on Friday night and reopening at your normal rate of spending on Monday. Spiegel. The plan also rules out any tax increases to close the deficit, though. Even the plan of the Democrats does not mention new taxes, so your movement already won the debate over taxes. Meckler. This debate is not about taxes. This is a question of spending. There's no amount of taxes that we could raise that would stop our deficit spending caused by politicians who have lied so often. Spiegel, your movement often refers to Ronald Reagan, the Republican icon, but he raised taxes 11 times and the debt ceiling 18 times. Meckler, at no time did he control both houses of Congress. So often he had no choice. But Reagan got attacked viciously by conservatives over this, just as we would attack any Republican president in the future if he did something similar. Spiegel, the U.S. economy is still growing very slowly. If you cut government spending drastically now, you will risk having a double-dip recession. Meckler, that is simply wrong. Government spending is never efficient. Spiegel, but in the short run, the cuts will lead to even higher U.S. unemployment. Meckler, possibly on a minimal level, but we have worried about the short term for so long that we've damaged the long-term prospects of our nation. Look at what is going on over in Europe. Spain is a complete disaster. It has more vacant homes than we have here. With only 40 million people, Italy is a complete disaster. Europe is going down the same path as the U.S., only many countries are far ahead and don't take corrective action. Spiegel, Speaker Boehner failed several times to rally Republicans around his plans. Does he need to go? Meckler, we have polled our membership and 74% of our members in our 3,500 chapters said it's time to look at new leadership. Spiegel, and should he be replaced by a Tea Party representative? Meckler, the ultimate goal is to have somebody in the House who is fiscally responsible. We've changed the debate in the United States, which is a pretty radical thing to do in such a short period of time. The question back then was, how much more will we spend next year, not how much can we cut? But you will see a much more profound change in 2012. Spiegel, who could be the Tea Party candidate in the next presidential election? Meckler, the movement has no clear preference. Our members are taking a cool, careful look at all the candidates on the Republican side. I'm actually glad people are not more excited and blown away. The last time we saw that on the campaign trail, the country got Barack Obama in the White House, and that led to complete economic disaster. Now, I don't like this where he says our members are taking a cool look carefully at all the candidates on the Republican side. Okay, how many times do you have to be betrayed by the Republicans to figure out that the Republicans are in bed with the Democrats to bankrupt this nation? How many times do you have to be tricked? Look at Boehner. Look at the scheme he came up with. So I like what this guy says. It's fascinating that this Der Spiegel interviewer might as well be Der Democrat. Basically, he uses every Democratic talking point against this Tea Party guy, which is just, everyone is a transparent lie, especially this whole shutdown thing, default thing that the Democrats have been arguing. And so now we've got this bill apparently is going to pass, which is just not even any cuts. So it's not surprising to see the currency continue to collapse, although we're getting a short-term rally. So I wanted to read a little bit of the latest Jim Willie, because this actually isn't in the Jim Willie Central archives, and I'm not really sure why. It may be something different, but it's a very interesting article. It's the first time I've seen Jim Willie really lay it on the line about what he believes, so I'm going to try to read that whole thing. I might not have time. This is called Conscience of a Gold Investor by Jim Willie. It came out July 29th, and it's very in your face. So let's start on this. Many deep dilemmas face investors of gold and silver. First and foremost, we feel an urgent need to defend ourselves against a crippled, corrupted U.S. dollar. The level of debilitation cannot be adequately put into words, as it has lost perhaps 70% of its value since just 1980, when Jackass entered the workforce after years at the university. The U.S. economy cannot be rebuilt or sustained on bond fraud, debt auctions covered by the printing press, endless war, phony accounting, outsourced industry, home equity extractions, rigged financial markets, constant deception on economic recovery, falsified economic statistics, and pursuit of the next asset bubble. The end game is fast along, gaining traction as much as the public attention. The remedies put in place to date have centered on additional currency debasement of all major currencies, extension of sovereign debt when its burden is already at a staggering level, the rescue of bank assets largely toxic from the bust in housing and mortgage has resulted in widespread redemption of nearly worthless bonds or heavily impaired bonds. The consequence has been a rapid rise in the entire cost structure to the global economy, without the benefit of rising incomes. Response has ranged from deep, open anger to private indignation to violence on the streets to consternation over homeowner plight to despair over lost jobs to depression over depleted savings to a sense of doom. The common denominator is a rising cost structure and powerful squeeze on business profits and household discretionary spending. Smart bankers and executives to financial firms are exercising their right to pursue survival by buying gold and silver bullion, which has no counterparty risk, has no debt attachment. The precious metals are pure assets, bona fide money in a world of false paper money whose obverse is debt. Individuals should follow their lead. The key to survival is gold and silver divorced from the US dollar and, in my opinion, separated from stock shares. As the implosion gathers strength, all things tied to paper securities will be damaged, while pure metal will soar in value in the greatest financial panic in the modern world has ever seen. The United States is Weimar America gone global, gone viral. Individuals must put aside all matters of conscience and focus on survival, real value, and truth. The patriotic thing to do is survive and preserve wealth. Period. The patriotism card is often played against precious metal investors as though handing over life savings to Goldman Sachs is the proper deed to show fealty. The Soviets cleverly assumed the Russian identity in much the same way the neocons and bankers and military team have done with the American identity. The level of corruption cannot be adequately put in words, as the bond fraud has mixed with counterfeit along with money laundering from officially sanctioned and protected syndicate enterprise. Since touching the Kabul outskirts, a vertical integration has come to the contraband enterprise and its sophistication. The individual investor has simple motives to make money, but more so to protect against total ruin, home foreclosure, job loss, deep erosion of life savings, inability to provide for the family, even becoming a debt slave. The motive is to prepare for the inevitable implosion and work towards survival. It became very apparent to the jackass before the hat-trick letter was launched in April 2004 that the U.S. economy and its financial foundation were heading toward a climactic death spiral, the doorway to be entered fatefully by 2007 or 2008. The urgency for protection of assets and way of life was immediately obvious. Any nation that endorses the dispatch and forfeiture of a large portion of its industrial base to China for the express purpose of lowering its cost is moronic at best and suicidal at worst. But the real story is laced with yet more Wall Street intrigue. They leased the vast Chinese gold and silver stockpiles only to betray the Beijing bankers a couple years ago. The extent of the betrayals, corruption, and privilege confiscation by Wall Street firms since the Reuben Fox entered the U.S. Department of Treasury henhouse is astonishing. The greater shame is that 90% of Americans have no idea what ransacking they did to Fort Knox, swiping its gold, even perhaps swapping some for tungsten, which left the United States as a nation vulnerable to systemic failure from the absent currency collateral, and putting the nation on a path toward being a play toy object of the sprawling syndicate that wrested power from the nation before any 9/11 event. A conference in Switzerland in the late 19th century wrote the script, but 2001 marked the day when a flag of a different color began to fly over the U.S. government and its many subservient agencies. The gold investor must contend with internal personal patriotism issues, since any investment placed against the U.S. dollar carries immediately clear implications. My father will not invest heavily in gold since he regards it as a position taken against the nation and its future. The jackass disagrees wholeheartedly, since the nation's leaders are not loyal either to the people or its national constitution. Sadly, World War II veterans are some of the easiest gullible parties to enlist for joining the movement in support of this war on terrorism. In my view, one need only be a high school dropout to detect the falsity and contradictions of the official 911 story. The false flag cover on the tired, tattered official story is slowly coming off, the ugly truth unmasked. The U.S. suffered a coup d'etat led by financial titans and military opportunists. Their motive is profit, dominance, and license to control life in a far-flung plan. They occasionally are interrupted, like with the swine flu spread through supposed vaccines. Their financial plot to tax the air we breathe was also interrupted, another sham. Their control over the press and free rein given to the key security agencies in what the jackass calls the axis of fascism have introduced a magnificent threat to the world itself that will persist until perhaps the calling card US dollar is retired and buried. Its axis center in a 180-degree full twist is the United States, the United Kingdom, and a little nation that sits on the southern Mediterranean and looks northwest to Italy. He was a little reluctant to mention that one. The Axis has taken license to ply their espionage games without regard for law, property, or life. What began as a beacon of freedom has turned into global fascism, with alliances formed with bankers, defense contractors, news magnates, and opportunist billionaires. The people all too often serve as cannon fodder, not just Muslims, but Americans, British, and Western Europeans. The ploys are dangerous and devious. The Libyan war served as a cover for New York and London bankers to seize $90 billion in Gaddafi assets. They call them frozen, but they will never thaw. The Gulf of Mexico is another cover for a future adventure. Matt Simmons died with help trying to reveal the role of Halliburton in the geological roadmap. The latest is the attack on Norway, whose leader foresaw with warnings the same group from the fascist Axis has set their sights on the $1.5 trillion sovereign wealth fund. By the way, I did the math on that. That comes to $300,000 per Norwegian citizen, accumulated by Norway with their vast North Sea oil operations. The syndicate wants the funds to join in supporting a financial system in the US and the UK that is fast imploding. The Libyan funds helped, but with the U.S. Treasury bond black hole accelerating in its momentum and force, the needs have become almost unlimited. The Greek government debt situation has turned contagious, reaching Italy and, if truth be known, threatening the London banks. See the credit default swap activity recently. The remaining time is slim before a much wider implosion grows. The individual investor is running out of time to protect the wealth saved in a lifetime of work, sweat, and sacrifice. Gold and silver are the best way. Investment funds tucked away in bank certificates of deposit and in sponsored pension funds are the next target. The syndicate will use FDIC insurance leverage to snatch the bank CDs. They will use the tax deduction leverage to snatch the 401k and IRA funds. Already just today, a hat-trick letter subscriber in Maryland reported that local bank has refused redemptions of $1,000 Treasury bond certificates. Time is running out. The Max Kaiser method of revolt is so simple. Each U.S. citizen should purchase a single silver coin. The effect of the millions of flapping butterfly wings would bring down the J.P. Morgan pillars. Few heed the wisdom of the simple plan. They have been inculcated with propaganda for so many years that they could not comprehend precious metals at all. They do not even pay heed to the Constitution, which orders only gold and silver as money, valid to satisfy debts public and private. If told to use salt or oregano as legal tender, these sheep would surely comply with perhaps at most a raised eyebrow. The personal method of protection against a future darkened by syndicate power and overshadowed by its assault on liberties is not laid out for all to see and follow. The gold and silver solution is simple and clear, but many internal dilemmas are presented. The people must take an oppositional position against the power elite and the cancerous control wielded on the financial state. In doing so, they must at times resist the feeling of a soldier of insurrection. They must embrace it instead, but peacefully. Instead, consider imitating the model presented in Concord, Massachusetts by Henry David Thoreau. He engaged in civil disobedience in a symbolic manner with at least an historical effectiveness. Today, hundreds of thousands of betrayed, angry homeowners have decided to stop making mortgage payments in defiance. They demand proof of bank-held property title. They are winning in court rulings. The civil disobedience is spreading quietly and powerfully, even without much aid from exposure by intrepid lapdog press. Investors in gold and silver must ignore the calls of precious metal being a dead asset or the dishonor in taking a contrary position to the business investment direction. The bigger betrayal has come from corporate executive decisions. They invest in foreign workers. Take Cisco Systems, which announced job cuts of 10,000 workers, but they lied to the U.S. press and investors. A private email came from one of their employees to tell that a new strategy was adopted by Chambers at Cisco. To reduce costs, they will open many foreign facilities and expand jobs overseas. He omitted that planned item in the news conferences. So investors should seek precious metals instead, which has no corporate lying tongue, which has no leased gold paper certificates, which has no insolvent banker counterparty. And I don't have time to keep reading. It's a long article. I've already gone on too long. It is a unbelievable screed by Jim Willie. I agree with 99% of what Jim Willie says. He's amazing. I guess it's not surprising that he's a resident of Costa Rica. Probably couldn't get away with saying the things that he's saying in this country. But anyway, we've pretty much got the news that the debt ceiling is a deal. It looks like they are doing perhaps some kind of central bank intervention to prop up the dollar as it collapses against the yen and the Swiss franc. Now it looks like the intervention against the yen is not succeeding. The dollar continues to collapse against the yen. Now if we look at gold, you can see we had a big smackdown when the news was announced, but we're rallying back, trying to test those old highs we did just Friday of 1632. So the smackdown was short-lived. I think the market knows what this deal means, is more money. And obviously, if they spend more money, they're going to have to borrow more money. And where are they going to borrow more money? They're going to have to borrow more money from the bond market, and no one's buying our bonds. So that means the Fed's going to have to do a QE3. They're going to have to print more money, and we're just kicking the can down the road, heading to hyperinflation, and gold and silver prices are going to go to the moon. And we'll talk to you next time.